to the studio, Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, who's come in to take your calls. And in fact, thank you for coming in, Secretary of State.
Thank you.
Very good to see you. You will not be surprised, because we've been mentioning that you will be coming in, that the first caller is absolutely on your brief. It's about education. It's Kiran in Birmingham. Kiran, you're through to Gillian Keegan. Go ahead. Kiran, good morning.
Good morning. Hi there. So people have been balloting to strike recently. Do you think they should be allowed to?
Do you mean, are you talking, just to specify, do you mean teachers or do you mean ambulance workers and paramedics?
I'm talking about teachers specifically, given that I am a teacher myself.
Stay on the line, I'll come back to you. We know there's new legislation planned in the new year that will look at some kind of minimum service requirement, and that may well affect ambulance workers. Your brief, should teachers and other school staff be able to strike?
Well, teachers are allowed to strike. In fact, they're balloting right now, and we're expecting those ballots to close sometime in January, between the 9th and the 16th. So there's 4 different unions. I very much hope teachers don't strike, but of course that is their right, and they will.
Should that right be preserved?
Well, there is a discussion about, what to do around minimum standards and what's critical workers, etc. But it's not really been applied so far, the discussion to teachers. It's more been about ambulance workers, maybe critical infrastructure workers, etc. And that'll be a debate that we'll be having. I very much hope that teachers don't strike. One of the very first things that happened when I got the job 8 weeks ago is I received a letter from the unions, all the unions, saying we needed additional funding, both to fund the pay increase that had been recommended and the one that we'd accepted, but also other additional pressures in schools, and they were asking for £2 billion more for next year and the year after. And that was the very first thing I had to do, and the autumn statement, we did get that. So exactly what the unions wrote to me about, we did get that extra funding, which I know all schools found out about last Friday, and I think has gone a long way to easing a lot of the pressures and a lot of the concerns that people had about redundancies and things they may have to do if they didn't get that additional funding.
Kiran, have you voted to strike?
Yes, we have. I've voted yes, because even though you've answered to the funding question, it's not just about the money, I'm afraid. It's also about the conditions. So you are well aware, I don't need to tell you, that teachers that are coming in within 3 to 5 years, they're leaving in droves. There's more to this, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details. I'm sure you know all about it. So we're not just striking about pay. And also the funding that's being promised, the rises that have been promised are, in comparison to the inflation and the 12 years of austerity, it's still not good enough, to be completely frank with you. So even though, the autumn statement came out, and thank you very much for that, but after 12 years of austerity, it's not just teachers that are striking. Obviously, we're getting to the point where nurses and ambulance workers are having to, and I do believe that they have a right to strike just as much as teachers do. I don't think that their right to strike is any less or more than ours, and I think, yes, they should put something in place so that emergency services are in place, like the nurses have done. But that does not mean that their right to strike should be any less or more than teachers.
Just to clarify, of course, they do have Category 1 and Category 2 provision at the moment, and that is taking place across the country. Why, and thank you for that, Kiran, why are teachers leaving? If you agree that within the first 3 to 5 years, why are teachers leaving the profession?
Well, first of all, can I say thank you to Killian and everybody who is, working in our schools, because it has been tough. The pandemic has had a massive impact on education, on our kids' education. They're doing a lot to catch up. And it has, it's been a tough environment. In terms of teachers, what we're doing is trying to improve the teacher training.
But why are they leaving?
Well, I think there's a number of factors, but one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure that people are more supported on the way in. So we've put in place a new programme where for the first 2 years, anybody starts, they will have somebody helping and mentoring them and supporting them in that classroom as they get used to the job, etc. I think it's about support, it's about professional development. Is it
about money? Did you see the NASUWT survey that found 1 in 10 teachers now has a second or sometimes third job because their teaching salary doesn't cover their monthly outgoings? You'll agree teaching's hard enough.
Well, so the what we've done recently is raise the starting salary because we need to attract, obviously, graduates into teaching. So it's now £28,000 for somebody just starting straight from uni, and it will be £30,000 by 2024. That was a manifesto commitment. So that's something that we've done, and we're on the way to doing that. Within teaching, you get a rise within bands, so you go up incrementally based on time and promotion, and then you get obviously promotion within the bands themselves, and we offer a lot of professional development to enable people to do that.
Newspaper reported that teachers become taxi drivers at night or work in a pub. That can't be right, can it?
Well, the average salary of a classroom teacher is £39,000. That's the classroom teacher. Of a head teacher,
is that anywhere in the country, or is that in London?
Yes, that's everywhere in the country. So you get a bit more in London and a bit more in outer London, but that's the average across the country. I think it breaks down something like primary 38 and 37 something, and secondary 41, 42. And that's the classroom teacher. If you then become a head of year, it goes up to
difficult to raise a
50
family
odd.
on £39,000 per annum.
Well, my cousin's just started teaching. Well, I've got quite a few cousins who are teachers, but she's just started teaching. And, she's on 28 grand. I mean, she's 23, I think. And she's, she's living in Knowsley. So I think she's probably
she's
in the
single,
top.
so she's not got children.
She's still living with her mum and dad, but, and she's still single, yes. But, I don't know if she's got a boyfriend or not, but she's not married, and she's not living away from home. But,
we'll get her on the phone if you want.
The reality is, she'll probably be horrified.
Yes,
but the reality is, it's a good career, right? It's probably in the top 10% of earners in some parts of the country. Of course, there's always things that you can say you could earn more money doing various careers. We know that you could be an LBC presenter, right? You'd probably earn a little more than that.
You wouldn't want to sink that low. And I've just had a message from Gary Ratcliffe, who's chief executive of the Galaxy Trust. They run 9 schools in Kent. At one of my schools, as well as those doing private tutoring, I've got a teacher who dances at the weekend in a Greek restaurant and a teacher working as a farmhand. Are you sure the salaries are enough?
Well, I've just given you the salaries. They're a lot higher than the average salaries across the country. And if you want to, obviously rise up the profession, I mean, an average head is on 95,000, and some of the heads are on 150 and 300. So the career progression within education, there's a lot of potential for career progression into leadership roles, even leading, within a department or within a year or a house.
OK, let's get... Kiran, thanks for getting us started. It's Rebecca in Bromley now. Rebecca, go ahead. Your question to Gillian Keegan. Morning, Rebecca.
Good morning. Hello. Thanks for having me on the show. I am also a teacher, so some of the things that you just said I would probably have an issue with.
What specifically, Rebecca? Just what? Okay, as you're in the profession, God knows we value you. Pick up on one aspect.
Okay, so I think the fact that teachers are you're citing them as one of the higher paid public servants in this country, as a low wage economy, which is what this government prides us on as being, I think that's probably more shameful than something to celebrate. I know I am not a mathematician, I am a primary school teacher, but I know how far my wages go every month. And as Nick has just said, I know many people who are having to have second, even third jobs because they cannot make ends meet. Now, you are quoting your niece. If you live at home and you don't have any outgoings and you don't have any children, obviously that money doesn't have to go towards a mortgage, towards your heating bill, towards all the other things that you need to make your life tick over. So when you actually write down on a piece of paper the numbers, they don't add up. And people that I know who are teaching, who are single and have children, they are really struggling.
Have you voted for a strike, Rebecca? Just lastly, before we move on.
Well, I mean, it's a very, very difficult... The answer to that is yes. Okay. It's a very, very difficult thing to do because as a teacher, like a nurse, you have chosen that job because you want to make a difference to children's life. You want to do something positive, and the last thing you want to do is not turn up at work.
I hear you. Can I move you to the question I think was regarding ambulance crews, wasn't it, Rebecca?
Yeah, so that my question about ambulance crews, who I have in full sympathy with because I do not know how they do their job every single day, in the conditions that they're doing them is that my daughter has epilepsy. So regularly we have had to call an ambulance, and the last year hasn't been great. Over the last year, there have been, I would say, 4 or 5 times when I have had to ring 999, and I have been told that there is a 3 to 5 hour wait for an ambulance. You cannot get a taxi when your 21-year-old daughter is having a seizure on the floor. Right. So I don't have that option of getting a taxi.
Your question is what is presumably what is the government, and you don't have to apologise for a moment.
What is the government doing to save the NHS, to make sure that all of these things function so that my daughter doesn't have to wait 3 to 5 hours, which, to be brutally honest, could be the difference between life and death.
And it must be the longest 3 to 5 hours of your life. My best wishes for your daughter's health. Let's get the Secretary of State in. What is the government doing? It seems to be absolute loggerheads, Secretary of State.
Well, the first thing we're doing is obviously making sure that we put the funding into the NHS. So just again, the facts, I can only, give the figures, and obviously it's terribly worrying for Rebecca and her daughter. And epilepsy, all of us will have seen, it's very, very scary when that happens. And of course you want help as soon as possible, because it can also escalate. So the funding that since 2010 we've increased the funding by about 40% in the NHS. So we're now spending more than ever, 170.
Yes, but inflation's eaten into that, of course.
170 billion. Well, inflation's actually been very low for most of that period. Obviously, we've had this peak, which is nothing to do with the government, right? We know it's all across the world. It's to do with the war in Ukraine, and it will. We also think it's peaking, right? So we know that this is not a long-term thing unless we bake it in, and this is the really difficult thing, and the message we're trying to get across. We understand that everybody, of course, has got inflation. Everyone's got inflationary pressures across the whole world, actually. And we do understand that. But what you can't do, and we've seen how this plays out, we saw this, if you start to continue to pay more and more and more, you actually do create a spiral, which doesn't actually help people, because the mortgage costs
Secretary of State,
will go up.
Are you honestly telling me it helps people that they can't get an ambulance if they're a category
No, sorry,
3?
I'll go on to the... I was just...
strike in 100 years.
You just asked me about the money, so I'll just go on to the money. But I will, more importantly, go on to the care.
You're a senior member of a government that's uniquely managed to have these 2 strikes.
Well, we can see what's happening, right? I mean, we have these independent processes. You'll have been through all this with Steve earlier.
Yes.
The reality is, in terms of the money...
independent it is. You don't get the job unless the relevant Secretary of State recommends you.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, what we asked...
And the chair is appointed by the Prime Minister.
What we put in and what they came back was a lot higher, right? They came back with a lot higher, and we accepted it. But for teachers, that is. So in terms of the money, it's nearly 170 billion. It's 40% more. And obviously, in the autumn statement, as well as education getting more money, we got more money for 6.6 billion. But most importantly, because Rebecca mentioned the 5-hour wait, and one of the problems that we've seen is the whole processing through in the hospital, and I used to be the social care and mental health minister. Indeed. A lot of that is seen as the social care part of the system, which is where people have usually gone into hospital because of a fall or something, and they need some help when they get home, or some help to get to a care home. So there was an additional £7.5 billion put in just to help solve that problem, which went in the autumn statement. Because actually, as you say, the ambulance going on strike is obviously very serious, and we're really very disappointed that that's happening, and also very disappointed that the Category 2, with those discussions have been taking place about how that is actually responded to. But as Rebecca said, the 5 hours is a long time if you're in distress. So we have to work on the whole process anyway.
Why don't you refer this to ACAS, the Independent Pay Negotiation?
Well, there is the Independent Pay body, and saying
Secretary of State is not
independent. It is independent.
You don't get the job unless you're signed off for by the
Nick,
health
it's
secretary.
been independent for years. Every government's used it
failed.
for years.
It's clearly not working. Why have ACAS if something of this magnitude? And you have children, you know how serious it is if someone's ill. We've just heard from Rebecca. You want ambulances to be there. We've got nurses on picket lines, first industrial action in a century, first ambulance strike in 30 years. What is the point of ACAS if the government doesn't use it?
Well, we had we've got the process.
Keep going. This has failed, obviously. It's stalled.
Well,
The union is not going to listen to the PRB.
What we're trying
Anyone
to
can see that.
What we're trying to do is make sure that we do not bake in inflation. It's so important. We've seen how this happens.
Send it to ACAS.
We've seen how it happens. The fact of the matter is that they're asking for a very, very large rise. Inflation. If we can do the right thing now and stabilise the economy, we will have a position where inflation will be coming down next year. By the time we're actually working on the next pay from April next year, which obviously will take into account what's happened to inflation. But it's really serious because the thing about inflation is you cannot spend your way out of it. If you do, you'll end up with a spiralling inflation, which will impact mortgage rates, which will impact rent. And even if you give extra money, it'll all get eaten up into rent or, it's really important that we get that balance right. Because, of course, it's the workers, everybody else, who also has to pay. And I think it's about £1,000 it would cost every family. This is a lot of money.
Rebecca, I'm grateful for your call. We must move on. Sally is in Stourbridge. Go ahead, Sally. Good morning to you.
Nick and Secretary Gillian. With all the problems around underfunding in the public sector, I think parents would be surprised to know that private schools get considerable tax breaks and are considered charity status. Do you think that's fair?
This is, I think, moving towards the Sir Keir Starmer issue, possibly about VAT. Secretary of State.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, because this has been there for a long, long time, right? So in the 13 years of a Labour government, they never once changed this. And you have to ask the question why. 13 years is quite a long time to make legislative change.
12 years have been a long time under the Conservatives, certainly.
Exactly. And the reason why they probably didn't do it then, and the reason why we haven't suggested to do it is because there's two reasons. The first is there's a lot of work that they do, bursaries they provide, and other work that they do with other schools. But more importantly, if you lots of people think of private schools like Eton and Harrow and those. The vast majority of schools are probably ex-grammar schools who are now gone private. If you put that increase on, you don't need that many of them to close or pupils to move, and then the state gets the whole of the bill. So it's an economic thing, actually. If you look at it and think nothing will change, well, of course you can get some money back because you don't give the VAT. But if you think that you do something which impacts the market, which everybody who's looked at it in detail then comes to the conclusion that actually they probably impact the market, what that means is then we get the bill for all of those children. Right. We'll have to build new schools, and it starts to become it could cost you money as opposed to you saving money. I believe he is wrong, and I think when he gets into the detail, which is probably what happened when the last Labour government were in, you look into all the detail, you do the analysis, you do the modelling, and you think actually this could cost more, and it could also destabilise a sector. It takes a long time to build a school. We're building a lot of new ones. It can take 4 or 5 years, so it's also takes time to do properly.
Sally, thank you. Sean in Mill Hill, you're through to the Secretary of State. Go ahead, Sean. Sean?
Yeah, hi.
Go ahead, yeah.
Hi. Hi.
Yes, your question to Gillian Keegan.
Okay, my question was more about, in my understanding is I have two daughters. One is at Oxford, one has gone through apprenticeship to Fashion Retail Academy. My point always has been they both made their choices. There was no pressure from the family.
Right.
And the apprentice is as happy, as successful as the one in Oxford.
Right. What's your question, sir?
My question is, why is it that there's a conscious sort of push for children to go to uni rather than...
Okay. Well, of course, I'm sure you had involvement as father. Let's put that more generally. There was a sense, possibly under a previous government, under the Blair administration, that it was almost part that you went to primary, you went to school, you went to tertiary, you had to go to university. I know you didn't go to university. You seem to have done all right out of it.
Yes.
Is there too much of it? Almost it's accepted life's passage. You shall go to university. Secretary of State.
Well, I think, first of all, I think Sean should be very proud. He's got one daughter at Oxford and one daughter at Fashion Retail Academy, which is actually fantastic college as well. And the reality is apprenticeships. I left school at 16.
16,
I grew up in Liverpool, and I left school at 16 and did an apprenticeship in a car factory. And it was a brilliant way to get into the workplace. I did actually go and do a degree as part of that. They sponsored me, so I am the only degree apprentice in the House of Commons. But it is a fantastic route. And I think what we need to do is make sure there's more of that on offer to more people. Of course, people want to go to university. I mean, both of our boys couldn't wait to leave us, to be honest. They wanted to go away and have fun, and they did well, and they enjoyed it very much, and they got a lot of great experience out of it. But you've got to make a very conscious choice. The thing I always used to say to them, and I would say to anybody thinking about this, is it's a big decision. It's about a 50 grand decision that you're making at 18. It's probably one of the biggest decisions, second or third biggest decisions after your partner and your house, right? So I think you really do have to think about it and make sure that what you're going to do is leading you to where you want to go. Degree apprenticeships are something I'm a huge fan of, and higher level apprenticeships, because what that means, and we were just talking about salary, right? What that means is you get paid, your tuition fees get paid, and you don't have to pay back your tuition. A lot of teachers will be paying back an extra 9% on their salary every year. You could save that if you did it via a teaching apprenticeship, which is something I'm really looking into improving, because I think it's a great way, and you also start earning earlier and you avoid a big debt.
Let's come back to our schools. Thanks for that, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Coming to you, Marcus, in a moment. But I note that earlier this month, the government guidance to help teachers deal with the growing number of children identifying as transgender has been delayed. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan saying it will not be published until early next year. And you also said, quotes, "I haven't seen any of it yet." When will it be published, and what are your concerns, or have you seen it all now?
I've now had a draft, and I will be going through line by line, so I've just received a draft of that. It's just a very sensitive topic that you need to get right. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, if you go on Twitter, you see the very extremes of it, but we've seen it, how the conversation is very, very polarising. So we need to do two things. First of all, make sure that children are well supported and looked after as they're going through a complex part of their journey anyway, particularly the teenage years. But secondly, we need to make sure that parents and schools know how to deal with this and to treat it sensitively, but also transparently as well, making sure that everybody understands, what children are being taught, it's age appropriate.
Well, what are children being? I mean, your department came under fire for suggesting that in some instances children are taught that sex is a spectrum.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it. This is why the guidance is so important, right? Because there has been, some stories about things that people are concerned with, saying, well, what's that, and why are you teaching that? So that's why the guidance is important. It will be consulted on, and we will have quite a long consultation, because we really do need to make sure that we get this right and provide the right support to schools and teachers, who, by the way, also probably look at this and think, gosh, how am I going to deal with this?
Do we need 3 toilets near each school?
Well, I mean, probably if you've got a lot of kids, you need 3 toilets.
No, I'm so sorry, I misphrased that. Boys, girls and another, or trans toilets, do we need those?
Well, again, some schools do have that. Some schools...
But do we need that? What's your Secretary of State for Education?
You know what, I am, and the thing I have strong views on is making sure that everyone gets to a really great school, a good outstanding school.
But if they need to relieve themselves during the course
and that they get to go to a toilet, yeah.
So
and
should
then
there be
the configuration the configuration of the toilet is not something that I have
perhaps I'll put to you a question I once put to Sir
the
Keir...
schools will do what the right thing is that they think for their kids.
Well, let me put to you a question I once put to Sir Keir Starmer. Can a woman have a penis?
No, I'm a woman, right? Last time I looked, Nick,
right.
I didn't have one. No.
Right, OK. So why can't we have that clarity of thought as regards the provision of toilet facilities or children taking part in transgender sports teams?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around sports, and the sporting bodies have also been involved in that. We are getting to more clarity. The guidance is meant to try and have that conversation and get to more clarity. It isn't a binary thing, Nick. We've got to also be quite sensitive to people who are going through this transition, who are, and they are very marginalised, and a very marginalised group, and the outcomes are quite concerning as well for their mental health.
Let's get back to the teaching profession with Marcus in Hackney. Marcus, your question to Gillian Keegan, last minute or two. Go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Nick.
Not at all.
So my question is specifically around education for deaf children, because my son is deaf. He goes to Laycock Primary School in Islington, which is a really good flagship school for deaf children in Britain. But the head teacher there, backed by Islington Council, is right now proposing cuts that will decimate the deaf unit, which in turn I expect to have irreversible impacts on my son's education and employment prospects.
Right.
So, clearly there isn't adequate funding for special educational needs in this country. And I'd really like I'd like to get the Secretary of State's views on this and to see if she's willing to commit to looking into these issues and deaf education in the UK.
OK, and this also comes, of course, with special educational needs. You might have seen this survey, Secretary of State, in The Observer, in a poll of 922 SEND, special educational needs and disabilities coordinators in primary and secondary schools. In this survey, only 6 schools said they did not have an issue with the numbers of support staff. For those potentially then, for those children who need most of our help, attention, love and care, we seem to be sadly lacking, Secretary of State.
Well, let me assure Marcus that this is something that is very dear to my heart. I have a nephew with Down syndrome, and so I've always very much been concerned to make sure that people who have any special educational needs have the right support that they need, because, the outcomes, they can have brilliant outcomes. Indeed. Or not, depending on if they get the right support.
In Marcus's case, and indeed 922, only 6, so we can say 916 of these institutions, they're lacking the necessary care.
So that's why the extra $2 billion that we got, we've said that 400 million of that will go to high needs, and that has to be passed on to the schools via the local authority. In Islington, Laycock School, which is a fantastic school, Islington, they got just Friday, so this is only new money, right? So it's just hitting, and they'll get paid it in April. But we sent an extra 195 million will be going to Islington, which is an extra £9 million. So there is
195 million to one local borough.
Yes,
or they get a share of it.
No, that's for one local borough.
So Islington's getting an additional 195.
No, they're getting 195, which is additional 9.
I'm sorry, an additional 9. I'm sorry. Okay,
an additional
and is that
9 million.
Specifically to be targeted on issues such as Marcus's?
Well, we have said that we want to make sure that 400 million overall goes to high needs, and that is passed on, because that goes via the local authority, so that's passed on to the schools as well. There has been an issue, and there's also been an issue with enough places, so we've also put in an extra 2.6 billion to build more high needs, more special educational places. I know in my own area, the special educational school is 3 times oversubscribed. Everybody is trying to get a place there, so we need to build more places. We have a problem with the way that we do special educational needs, because we haven't had enough places, because the demand has grown a lot. What's happened is you've got some people go into very expensive facilities which the councils are paying for,
right.
And then others sort of sat on waiting lists waiting to try and get in a school. We are doing we have had a green paper, and we are doing an improvement plan for SEND, which we will be publishing early next year. It's something that there's many more children with special educational needs. We know a lot more about identifying special educational needs, and there's something that we're also training a lot more people in special educational needs as well.
OK, well, that money is there. So it's not just Islington, other local authorities,
everyone's
boroughs
getting
and
it. I just
county councils. No, particularly for
Marcus, I thought I'd look at Islington.
OK, Marcus, thank you. We come to the end. Now, this is my first opportunity to speak to you since you were appointed in your senior position in the Cabinet. And I noted with interest they couldn't go after you for being the head boy or head girl of a school such as Charterhouse or Winchester, but they could go after you because of your choice of wristwatch.
Yes, yeah.
I'd love to know your reaction, because you left school at 16 from Liverpool. You then, I think, managed to get 10 O-levels, and you then became an apprentice at a factory owned by General Motors. I would argue if you've managed to get enough money to buy a Rolex, good luck to you. But how did you respond to that attack?
I was quite surprised, really. I think it's almost like assuming that you're working class, you start working class, and you can't become anything else. And, I mean, I've worked for 38 years, I haven't stopped working. In fact, I started work at 13 in a Saturday Girls in a shop in St John's Market. I've worked every year for 38 years. And it was actually a birthday present for my 50th. So I only got it 4 years ago, but from my whole family, so which my husband paid for most of it. But it was a very special gift. It was obviously something I treasure, and I'll have for the rest of my life. And hopefully, it will pass on on for generations as well. I realise I'm very lucky to be able to, have this, but, I did also work a lot and wait a long time to get it. And one of the things that struck me as well is I've never seen anybody take a picture of anyone else's watch and say, why? I mean, I don't know if what you're wearing, but...
it's a Panerai.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's about half the value of yours.
Yeah, but it's still expensive.
It's a very expensive watch, yeah, very expensive watch.
And obviously you're much younger, so, But
now you're just being cheeky. But I don't get involved in setting the pay of people such as teachers or ambulance drivers.
Neither do I.
The
The independent pay review does, which is
let's
why
go down
we
that
must,
road again, Gillian.
We must take the politics out of pay, because, by the way, if you don't, you will end up, every year, by the way, you could end up with this situation. It happened in the 70s. Every year it happened the same, and we saw the mess.
But just coming back to your watch,
into.
you asked me about it. So do you think there's a bit of sort of envy? Or can I put it like this? You're from Liverpool, you shouldn't be able, you'd left school at 16, you shouldn't get a watch. Do you think that's what... I mean, when they took the pictures, as you said, no one else... I've never seen a male Prime Minister have his watch taken a picture. I've never seen a female politician have her watch taken a picture.
No, or any other party. So, no, I don't know why. I guess I'm supposed to sort of never have made anything of myself, never have made any money, stayed in Knowsley. I don't know. I think... It's like an inverted snobbery or something. I mean, everybody dreams. This is the thing I try to get across to people, and certainly, people who are from a different background. Everybody feels the same. Everybody thinks they've got something to contribute. Everybody wants to get on in life. Not everybody does, and it's much harder from a background like mine to get on. But the reality is, every kid has the same dream. Every kid has the same dream of either, being whatever it is they'd like to be, and having a nice car and a nice house. Now, all of our dreams aren't always, realised, but it doesn't mean that we don't have them.
And that's where teachers play their role.
Very much, 100%. I mean, I talk about my teacher, Mr. Ashcroft, at my school. It was a failing comprehensive school in Knowsley.
What did Mr. Ashcroft teach?
He taught technical drawing, engineering, all of those topics, and they said girls couldn't do that. Anyway, the compromise was he stayed behind after school till 5:30 to teach me and another girl, Jane, to do those O-levels, and because I was one of the last years to do O-levels. And not only did that mean I got those, but it also led me on to my apprenticeship. He was a proper life changer, for everyone. So,
I think
and
everyone's
loads of
got a
kids.
teacher. I think everyone.
That's
mine
why
was in
everyone
history.
goes into teaching,
mine was
right?
in history.
They go into teaching for that
the light
reason.
bulb moment.
The light bulb moment. They are literally transforming lives, and that's why we need them there, because you can't transform lives if you're not there.
No.
And obviously, our kids have had nobody's been through anything like the pandemic, and the kids really, I mean, they're fantastic, and they're doing everything to catch up. We've had 2 million sort of catch-up tutoring lessons, but they need to have their teachers there, and you saw how excited they were when they went back to school.
Yeah,
they'll be
right.
horrified at the thought of being out of school again. So I do very much hope that we can work together to get through what will be quite a short time, and then we'll be back to normal levels of inflation, and hopefully we'll have a growing economy.
Enjoyed our time together. Happy Christmas to you and your family.
Happy Christmas
Thank you
to
very
you
much
and your
indeed.
listeners.
Thank you, Gillian Keegan,
Thank
Education
you.
Secretary, appearing here on LBC.
The Cabinet Minister Gillian Keegan has told LBC inflation mustn't be baked into wage increases as a wave of public sector strikes over pay continues. Ambulance workers in England and Wales are the latest to stage industrial action